The stars had been quiet for 3,000 years. Across the galaxy, hundreds of worlds lived under the peaceful rule of the Galactic Coalition. Their ships moved between planets like clockwork, carrying trade goods and maintaining order. Number 1 remembered the last time anyone had said no to them. Admiral Zenth stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking out at the small blue planet that hung in the darkness ahead. His tall, thin frame cast a shadow across the polished metal floor. The Valens had ruled the Coalition for 2,000 years, and Zenth had never met a species that could challenge their authority. The planet was called Earth by its people. The Coalition scouts had been watching it for months, listening to their radio signals and studying their technology. What they found was typical of most developing worlds. The humans were divided into hundreds of small nations, constantly fighting each other over resources and territory. Their weapons were crude, their ships barely capable of reaching their own moon. It should have been simple. The Coalition had done this same thing 500 times before on 500 different worlds. They would arrive, demonstrate their superior technology, and offer the locals a choice. Join the Coalition peacefully and enjoy the benefits of galactic civilization, or resist and face the consequences. Zenth had never needed to follow through on the second option. Every species they had encountered so far had been smart enough to recognize when they were outmatched. The communication officer, a young Valen named Kess, looked up from her station. Admiral, we have finished our analysis of the human communication networks. They appear to have over 200 separate governments with at least 40 major military forces. Zenth nodded. Perfect. Divided enemies are weak enemies. Open a channel to their largest population centers. Standard integration protocol? The message was broadcast to every major city on Earth. Zenth had given the same speech so many times he could recite it in his sleep. The Coalition came in peace, offering the gift of advanced technology and galactic citizenship. All the humans needed to do was accept Coalition authority and allow their worlds to be incorporated into the Empire. The response came 3 days later. Instead of the usual panicked messages from dozens of different governments, Earth sent a single reply. It came from something called the United Earth Defense Force, an organization that apparently had not existed when the Coalition first arrived. The voice belonged to a human female who identified herself as General Kate Murphy. Her words were polite but firm. Thank you for your offer. We respectfully decline. Please leave our system immediately. Zenth stared at the communication display for a long moment. In 3,000 years of Coalition expansion, no one had ever simply said no. There were always negotiations, always attempts to find some middle ground. But this human had dismissed them like they were nothing more than unwelcome visitors. Sir, Kess said quietly, how should we respond? Zenth straightened his uniform. Standard procedure. Deploy the fleet to strategic positions around their world. When they see our true strength, they will reconsider. The Coalition fleet was impressive by any measure. 300 ships, each one larger than anything the humans had ever built. They moved into position around Earth with practiced precision, their weapons trained on the planet's major cities. It was a show of force that had never failed to convince a reluctant species to surrender. The human response was not what Zenth expected. Instead of surrender, the humans launched their own ships. Small, crude vessels that looked more like flying metal boxes than proper spacecraft. They had no shields, no energy weapons, and their hulls were made of simple steel alloys. By all rights, they should have been destroyed before they could even reach weapons range. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan led the human fleet. His ship was called the New York, and it was typical of human construction. Bulky, inefficient, and covered in chemical rocket engines that left trails of fire across the darkness. But as Sullivan's fleet approached the Coalition forces, something strange happened. The humans did not try to match the Coalition's formation. They did not attempt to engage in the kind of organized fleet combat that had been standard across the galaxy for millennia. Instead, they scattered in all directions, moving in patterns that made no tactical sense. What are they doing? Kess asked, monitoring the human ships on her display. Zenth frowned. I do not know. Their movements are completely random. They should be forming a battle line. The first human ship to reach the Coalition fleet was Sullivan's own vessel. It was already badly damaged, its hull cracked and leaking atmosphere. Any reasonable captain would have retreated to save his crew. Instead, Sullivan accelerated directly toward the Coalition flagship. The Coalition weapons fired, tearing through the human ship's primitive armor. But instead of stopping, the New York continued forward. Its engines were still firing, pushing it faster and faster toward the much larger Coalition vessel. "He is going to ram us," Kess said, her voice filled with disbelief. "Impossible," Zenth replied. "No rational being would sacrifice themselves and their crew for such a minimal tactical advantage." But Sullivan was not interested in rational tactics. As his ship closed the final distance, he triggered every explosive device on board. The New York struck the Coalition flagship in a ball of nuclear fire, tearing a massive hole in its hull across. Other human captains were doing the same thing. Ships that were already dying turned themselves into guided missiles, ramming Coalition vessels or detonating their own power cores at point-blank range. The humans fought like they had nothing to lose, because to them, surrender was not an option. Captain Lisa Hayes piloted a small fighter craft loaded with primitive nuclear weapons. Her ship was so small that the Coalition's targeting systems had difficulty tracking it. She weaved between the massive enemy vessels, dodging energy beams and missile fire with desperate skill. When her ship took a direct hit that destroyed her engines, Hayes did not eject. Instead, she used her remaining momentum to crash into a Coalition cruiser's reactor core. The explosion lit up the darkness like a small sun. Taking the enemy ship with her, the battle lasted only 2 hours. But when it was over, the Coalition had lost 17 ships. The humans had lost everything they had sent, but they had proven something that shocked Zenth to his core. They would rather die than surrender. In the aftermath, Zenth found himself staring at casualty reports that exceeded anything in Coalition history. These primitive humans, with their crude weapons and makeshift tactics, had inflicted more damage on his fleet than any enemy in 3,000 years. "Sir," Kess said, "we have received another message from the planet." The communication screen flickered to life, showing the face of General Murphy again. She looked tired but determined. Behind her, Zenth could see humans working frantically to build more ships, more weapons, more defenses. "Admiral," Murphy said, "I hope you understand now that we are not like the other species you have conquered. We have seen what your Coalition does to the worlds it integrates. We have seen how you strip away everything that makes a people unique and turn them into servants." She paused, and Zenth could see something in her eyes that he had never seen before in any of the species he had encountered. It was not fear or desperation, it was a cold, calculating anger. "We are humans," Murphy continued. "We came from a world that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. We survived ice ages, plagues, and disasters that would have destroyed any other species. We learned to fight not because we wanted to, but because everything else on our planet was trying to eat us." The image shifted to show the surface of Earth. Zenth could see massive storms, active volcanoes, and creatures that looked like they belonged in nightmares. It was a world that no sensible species would choose to live on. "This is what made us," Murphy said. "A planet that never gave us a moment's peace. A world where only the strong survived and the weak became food." "You want to know why we refuse to surrender?" "Because surrender means death, and we have never learned how to die quietly." The transmission ended, leaving Zenth alone with his thoughts. For the first time in his career, he wondered if the Coalition had made a mistake. They had always assumed that superior technology would be enough to defeat any enemy. But these humans had shown him something he had never considered. What happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object? The Coalition was about to find out. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had never expected to become Earth's most important diplomat. 3 weeks ago, she had been studying alien plant samples in her laboratory at the Global Research Institute. Now she found herself sitting across from a captured Coalition officer, trying to understand an enemy that seemed to know nothing about humanity. The prisoner was a Valen named Torth, a science officer who had been rescued from a damaged Coalition ship. Elena had insisted on treating the enemy wounded, a decision that had puzzled both sides of the conflict. The Coalition could not understand why humans would waste resources on their enemies. The human military commanders thought it was a waste of time, but Elena had learned more about the Coalition in 3 days of conversation than all of Earth's intelligence services had discovered in months of intercepted communications. The truth was more disturbing than anyone had imagined. "Your species is an anomaly," Torth said, his tall frame folded awkwardly in the human-sized chair. "In 3,000 years of expansion, the Coalition has never encountered anything like you." Elena leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Every species we have met before you evolved on what your people would call garden worlds. Stable climates, abundant food, minimal predation. Most had never experienced true hardship before we arrived." Torth activated a small device that projected images into the air between them. Elena saw beautiful worlds with perfect weather, crystal, cities, and people who looked like they had never known want or fear. "These are the Calfani," Torth explained, showing her a species of blue-skinned humanoids. "They lived on a world with no seasons, no natural disasters, no dangerous animals. When we arrived, they were frightened by our ships but willing to negotiate. They saw the benefits of joining our civilization." The image changed to show another species, this one resembling large insects with delicate wings. The Xerians evolved in vast underground cities. They had eliminated all their natural predators millions of years ago. Their greatest concern was managing their population growth. Elena studied the images with growing understanding. "They were all easy targets." "Not targets," Torth corrected. "Partners. The Coalition does not conquer, we integrate. We offer technology, medical advances, and protection from the dangers of the galaxy. In exchange, we ask only for loyalty and cooperation." "And if they refuse?" Torth's expression became uncomfortable. "They never refuse, why would they? What we offer is clearly superior to their primitive existence." Elena stood up and walked to the window of the medical facility. Outside, she could see human workers rebuilding the damaged city with a speed that amazed even her. Buildings that had been destroyed in the Coalition attack were already being replaced with new structures designed to withstand future bombardments. "Let me tell you about Earth," she said. "Our planet has tried to kill us every day for millions of years. We have ice ages that last for thousands of years. We have volcanoes that can destroy entire continents. We have diseases that kill millions of people at a time." She turned back to Torth. "We have earthquakes that level cities, floods that wash away everything we build, and storms that can tear apart our strongest structures. Our planet is so dangerous that most of our myths and legends are about surviving natural disasters." Torth listened with growing amazement. "How did your species survive?" "We learned to fight back. We learned to adapt. We learned that if something tries to kill you, you find a way to kill it first." Elena activated her own display, showing images of Earth's history. Torth saw humans fighting massive predators with primitive weapons, building cities in the most hostile environments imaginable, and surviving catastrophes that would have destroyed any other species. "This is what made us," Elena said. "A world that never gave us a moment of peace. We had to become stronger, smarter, and more stubborn than anything else on our planet just to survive." Meanwhile, across the city, Captain Ryan Brooks was leading a rescue mission that would change everything. Intelligence reports had located a Coalition research station on one of Jupiter's moons, and Brooks had been ordered to capture it intact. The station was defended by Coalition security forces, but they were not prepared for human tactics. Where? Coalition soldiers fought with discipline, and by the book, humans fought with creativity and desperation. Brooks and his team used the station's own systems against the defenders, turning maintenance tunnels into attack routes and using the artificial gravity to their advantage when the station fell. Brooks expected to find military intelligence. Instead, he found something that made him sick to his stomach. The Coalition had detailed files on every species they had ever encountered, including complete psychological profiles and detailed plans for what they called integration management. Brooks read through the files with growing horror. The Coalition did not simply conquer other species. They studied them, learned their weaknesses, and then systematically destroyed everything that made them unique. Languages were replaced with Coalition standard. Religions were banned. Even family structures were modified to make the conquered people more compliant. They do not just want to rule us, Brooks reported to his superiors. They want to erase. U.S., back at the medical facility, Elena was explaining this same truth to Torth. Your Coalition is not a civilization. It is a machine that consumes other civilizations and spits out copies of itself. Torth looked confused. But we offer them a better life. Advanced technology, longer lifespans, freedom from want and fear. At the cost of everything that makes them who they are, Elena replied. You turn every species into Valens with different faces. She showed him images of the Coalition worlds she had found in the captured data. Despite their different origins, all the conquered species now looked remarkably similar. They dressed the same, lived in the same kinds of cities, and even had the same facial expressions. This is what you wanted to do to us, Elena said. Turn us into another copy of your perfect society. What is wrong with perfection? Torth asked. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Perfection is death. It is the end of growth, the end of change, the end of everything that makes life worth living. She pulled up another image, this one showing human cities around the world. Each one was different, reflecting the culture and environment of the people who built it. Look at us. We are not perfect. We fight, we struggle, we make mistakes, but we are alive. Torth studied the images with something that might have. In wonder, you choose to live with chaos. We choose to live with freedom, Elena corrected. The freedom to succeed, the freedom to fail, and the freedom to become something new. At that moment, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Elena looked out the window to see Coalition ships approaching the Earth's atmosphere. Admiral Zenth had decided to escalate the conflict, but as Elena watched, something unexpected happened. The Coalition ships were met not by a desperate human defense, but by a coordinated response that used tactics they had never seen before. Human ships moved in patterns that made no sense according to traditional military doctrine, but they were devastatingly effective. Elena turned back to Torth. Your admiral is about to learn something important about humans. What is that? We do not just fight to survive, we fight to win. And we learn from every battle. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Zenth was discovering the truth of Elena's words. The human ships were using weapons and tactics that had not existed during the first battle. They had studied the Coalition's technology, learned its weaknesses, and developed counters for every advantage the aliens possessed. How is this possible? Zenth demanded. They have had only weeks to study our technology. His science officer, a nervous Valen named Kess, looked up from her displays. Sir, they appear to be adapting our technology to their own purposes. They are not simply copying our weapons. They are improving them. Zenth watched in amazement as human ships used modified Coalition energy weapons to create devastating new forms of attack. Where the Coalition had designed their weapons for clean, efficient kills, humans had turned them into tools of chaos and destruction. Sir, Kess continued, we are receiving reports from across the fleet. The humans are using tactics that violate every principle of civilized warfare. They are attacking our supply lines, using civilian structures as shields, and refusing to follow any recognized rules of engagement. Zenth realized that the Coalition had made a fundamental error. They had assumed that all species would fight according to the same rules. The same principles of civilized conduct that had governed galactic warfare for millennia, but humans had not learned to fight from civilized teachers. They had learned to fight from a world that knew no rules except survival. And in that kind of fight, there were no limits to what they would do to win. As the battle raged around Earth, Elena continued her conversation with Torth. Your people made a mistake, she said. You assumed that we would be like every other species you had encountered. But we are not like them. We are something new. What are you? Torth asked. Elena smiled, and for the first time, Torth saw something in her expression that he had never seen before. It was not cruelty or hatred. It was something far more dangerous. It was hope. We are humans, she said. We are the species that looked at a universe full of things trying to kill us and decided to kill them back. Admiral Zenth had never felt fear before. In 200 years of service to the Coalition, he had faced pirates, rebels, and natural disasters with calm confidence. But as he watched the human fleet tear through his reinforcements, something cold settled in his stomach. The Coalition High Command had sent him their best warriors. The Korthik were a proud species, bred for combat on their homeworld's single massive continent. They had never lost a battle in their 1,000-year history of service to the Coalition. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, and their tactics proven against every enemy they had ever faced. But the humans were not like any enemy the Korthik had ever faced. Sergeant Alex Turner crouched behind a piece of twisted metal that had once been part of a Coalition supply depot. His squad had been studying captured Korthik equipment for 3 weeks, taking it apart piece by piece to understand how it worked. What they found had given them ideas that no Coalition engineer had ever considered. Johnson, you ready with that modified plasma rifle? Turner asked his weapons specialist. Private Danny Johnson grinned as he checked his weapon. It had started as a standard Coalition energy rifle, designed to deliver precise, lethal shots to enemy soldiers. But Johnson had spent 2 weeks rewiring its power systems and modifying its energy-focusing array. Now it could overload and explode on command, turning a single rifle into a devastating area weapon. "Ready, Sarge," Johnson replied. "This thing's gonna make a real mess." Turner nodded and signaled to his team. The Korthik warriors were approaching their position with textbook precision, moving in a formation that had been perfected over centuries of warfare. They expected to face human soldiers using crude projectile weapons and primitive tactics. Instead, they walked into a trap that used their own technology against them. Johnson's modified rifle exploded in a burst of superheated plasma that melted through the Korthik's advanced armor like it was paper. The explosion triggered a chain reaction in the Coalition equipment scattered around the depot, creating a fireball that consumed everything within 100 meters. But Turner's squad was already gone, having retreated through a tunnel they had carved using Coalition mining tools. The humans had learned to fight dirty, to use the environment as a weapon, and to never stay in one place long enough for the enemy to target them effectively across the battlefield. Similar scenes were playing out. The Korthik had expected to face human warriors in honorable combat. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow any rules they understood. Lieutenant Sarah Kim led a unit that had turned a civilian shopping center into a fortress. The humans had spent days preparing the building, using Coalition construction tools to create hidden passages and reinforced fighting positions. When the Korthik assault force arrived, they found themselves trapped in a maze of corridors filled with improvised weapons and deadly surprises. The Coalition forces had shields designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. They were not designed to stop a human engineer who had filled the building's fire suppression system with homemade explosives. Meanwhile, in the underground laboratories beneath New Geneva, Dr. Marcus Williams was making a discovery that would change the war forever. The Coalition computer systems were incredibly advanced, capable of processing vast amounts of data and controlling complex machinery with perfect precision. But they had one weakness that their creators had never considered: they were not designed to interface with biological systems. Williams had been studying the neural patterns of captured Coalition soldiers when he realized something remarkable. The alien brains operated on completely different principles than human minds, but the underlying electrical patterns were similar enough that a skilled engineer might be able to create a bridge between the two systems. Working with a team of neuroscientists and computer experts, Williams began developing a hybrid interface that could connect human consciousness directly to Coalition technology. The process was dangerous and experimental, but the potential applications were staggering. "If this works," Williams explained to his team, "we could control their ships, their weapons, even their communication systems directly through human thought." Dr. Nancy Foster, the team's lead neuroscientist, looked skeptical. "Marcus, you are talking about plugging a human brain into alien technology. The risks are enormous." "So is losing this war," Williams replied. "The Coalition has superior technology, but they use it in predictable ways. They follow protocols, stick to established procedures, and never take risks. But humans think differently. We are creative, intuitive, and willing to try things that logic says should not work." The first test subject was Williams himself. He had designed the interface and understood the risks better than anyone else. As the hybrid system came online, he felt his consciousness expand into the captured Coalition computer network. The experience was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The Coalition computers were vast and complex, filled with information from across the galaxy. But they were also rigid and inflexible, designed to follow specific patterns and procedures without deviation. Williams found that he could navigate the system using human intuition in ways that the original programmers had never intended. He could access secure files by following patterns that made sense to a human mind but violated every principle of Coalition computer security. Within hours, he had downloaded the complete technical specifications for every Coalition weapon, ship, and defensive system. But more importantly, he had learned how to make them better. Engineer Amy Chun had been working around the clock to convert Earth's industrial capacity into a war machine. Before the Coalition arrived, she had been designing more efficient solar panels and cleaner manufacturing processes. Now she was turning automobile factories into spacecraft production facilities and repurposing mining equipment into weapons of war. The Coalition had always relied on established supply chains and manufacturing protocols. Each ship was built to exact specifications in specialized facilities that had been designed for that specific purpose. The process was efficient but inflexible. Human manufacturing was different. The same factory that built cars in the morning could be retooled to build aircraft in the afternoon. The same workers who assembled computers could learn to build weapons. The same materials used for construction could be repurposed for military applications. Chun had discovered that human adaptability was not just a biological trait. It was a cultural one. Human society was built around the principle of making the best use of available resources, of finding new solutions to old problems, and of never accepting that something could not be done within months of the war's beginning. Earth's production capacity had exceeded anything the Coalition had ever seen. Human factories were producing new ships faster than the Coalition could destroy them, and each new vessel incorporated improvements based on lessons learned from previous battles, but the most significant change was in the ships themselves, where Coalition vessels were designed for specific roles and functions. Human ships were built to be adaptable. A transport could be quickly converted into a fighter. A cargo vessel could become a mobile weapons platform. A civilian ship could be transformed into a military vessel with minimal modifications. Colonel Lisa Hayes commanded one of these hybrid vessels, a former passenger liner that had been converted into a stealth attack ship. Her crew included former airline pilots, civilian engineers, and volunteers from every walk of life. They had no formal military training, but they had something the Coalition forces lacked: the ability to think outside the box. Hayes led her makeshift fleet in a series of attacks on Coalition supply lines. The enemy expected military targets and defensive actions. Instead, they found themselves facing civilian vessels that fought like military ships and military vessels that behaved like civilian transports. The psychological effect on the Coalition forces was devastating. They had been trained to fight according to established rules and procedures, but the humans seemed to have no rules at all. They attacked when logic said they should retreat, defended positions that appeared worthless, and used tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Admiral Zenth found himself facing reports of impossible victories and inexplicable defeats. Human forces were using coalition technology in ways that the original designers had never imagined. They were combining different systems to create new capabilities, modifying existing equipment to serve unexpected purposes, and finding weaknesses in coalition defenses that had been considered impregnable. How are they doing this? Zenth demanded during a meeting with his senior staff. His intelligence officer, Commander Vask, looked exhausted. Sir, they appear to be learning from every engagement. Each battle teaches them something new about our technology and tactics. They then share this information across their entire military structure within hours. That is impossible, Zenth replied. No species can adapt that quickly. With respect, sir, Vask said, we have been making assumptions about what is possible based on our experience with other species. But these humans are not like any species we have encountered before. Zenth stared at the tactical display showing the current positions of both fleets. Major Tony Rodriguez had expected to find weapons when his strike team captured the Coalition research station. Instead, he found something that made him want to destroy every piece of alien technology he could find. The station orbited a dead planet in a system 12 light-years from Earth. Intelligence reports suggested it was a minor outpost, probably used for communications or supply storage. Rodriguez and his team had spent 3 days fighting through automated defenses to reach the central computer core. What they discovered there changed everything. The research station contained detailed records of the Coalition's expansion over the past 3,000 years. Rodriguez read through file after file, each one describing the systematic destruction of another species' identity. The Coalition called it integration, but Rodriguez saw it for what it really was. Genocide. The Althany had been a species of artists and philosophers who lived on floating cities above their ocean world. They had created beautiful works of art that expressed emotions in ways no other species could understand. The Coalition had declared their art dangerous and primitive, then systematically destroyed every piece while forcing the Althany to create only approved works that followed Coalition standards. The Zelphic had been explorers and inventors who lived for the joy of discovery. They had developed unique technologies based on principles the Coalition had never seen before. The Coalition had taken their inventions, declared them inefficient, and forced the Zelphic to abandon their traditional methods in favor of standard Coalition procedures. The Corvani had been a proud warrior culture that valued honor above life itself. The Coalition had declared their customs barbaric and used genetic modification to make them more peaceful and compliant. Within a generation, the Corvani had forgotten how to fight and were assigned to manual labor throughout the Coalition empire. Rodriguez read through dozens of similar files, each one describing the death of a unique civilization. The Coalition did not just conquer other species, they erased them, turning every conquered people into pale copies of their Valen masters. Sir, called Sergeant Pete Collins from across the room. You need to see this. Collins had found another set of files, these ones labeled as current operations. Rodriguez felt sick as he realized what he was looking at. The Coalition had detailed plans for what they intended to do to humanity after the war was over. Human aggression would be eliminated through genetic modification. Human creativity would be channeled into approved projects that served Coalition goals. Human languages would be replaced with Coalition standard within 50 years. Human history would be rewritten to emphasize the benefits of joining the galactic community, but the most disturbing part was the timeline. The Coalition expected the modifications to take only 2 generations. They had so much experience turning other species into compliant servants that they had perfected the process. They're not just trying to conquer us, Rodriguez said. They're trying to erase us. Meanwhile, Commander Nicole Foster was making her own disturbing discovery on the edge of Coalition space. Her ship, the Philadelphia, was humanity's first vessel capable of faster-than-light travel. Built using captured Coalition technology and human engineering, it was a hybrid creation that represented the best of both civilizations. Foster had been ordered to scout Coalition territory and gather intelligence on enemy positions. Instead, She had found something that made her question everything she thought she knew about the galactic situation. The Coalition's border worlds were not the thriving civilizations she had expected. They were prison camps. On the planet Zarian Prime, Foster found a species called the Drenali living in massive industrial complexes. They worked 18 hours a day producing materials for the Coalition war machine, with no time for rest or recreation. Their children were taken away at birth to be raised in Coalition facilities where they learned to be proper citizens. The Drenali had once been farmers and craftsmen who lived in harmony with their world's natural cycles. Now they could barely remember their own history. Foster tried to communicate with them, but they seemed afraid to talk about anything except their work assignments. On another world, Foster encountered the Mechari, a species that had once been master engineers and builders. They had created cities that floated in their planet's thick atmosphere, marvels of engineering that had taken centuries to perfect. The Coalition had declared the cities inefficient and torn them down, forcing the Mechari to live in standardized ground-based structures that could have been built anywhere in the galaxy. Every world Foster visited told the same story. Unique. Civilizations reduced to factory workers and servants, their cultures destroyed and their identities erased. The Coalition claimed to have brought peace and prosperity to the galaxy, but Foster saw only the evidence of systematic cultural murder. The most disturbing discovery came when Foster encountered a Coalition patrol ship. Instead of attacking, the aliens tried to communicate. The ship's captain was a member of a species called the Vorthek, and he seemed surprised to meet humans who could fight back. "Your people resist the Coalition," the captain said during their brief communication. "This is not possible." "No species resists for long. Why not?" Foster asked. "Because resistance is futile. The Coalition always wins. They have better weapons, better ships, better tactics. Those who resist are destroyed. Those who surrender are integrated. There is no third option." Foster realized that the Coalition had been so successful for so long that even their enemies could not imagine defeating them. The conquered species had lost not just their freedom, but their hope. "What if we could change that?" Foster asked. The alien captain was quiet for a long moment. "Change is not permitted. The Coalition maintains order. Order brings peace. Peace brings prosperity. And what about freedom? Freedom is chaos. Chaos brings suffering. The Coalition protects us from suffering." Foster ended the communication, feeling more determined than ever. The Coalition had not just conquered other species. They had convinced them that conquest was natural and right, that resistance was impossible and wrong. Back on Earth, Dr. Sam Johnson was working on a project that would give the resistance new hope. Using the hybrid technology developed by Dr. Williams, Johnson had been studying the Coalition's most powerful weapon. Their planet killer, the massive vessel, was designed to crack planetary crusts and boil away oceans. It had destroyed 17 worlds in the Coalition's history, each one a final demonstration of their power to species that refused to surrender. The weapon was so devastating that most civilizations gave up simply from knowing it existed, but Johnson had discovered something remarkable about the planet killer's power source. It used controlled stellar collapse to generate energy, essentially, harnessing the death of stars to power its weapons. The technology was incredibly advanced, but it followed principles that human scientists could understand and improve upon. Working with a team of physicists and engineers, Johnson began developing plans for something the Coalition had never imagined. Instead of using stellar collapse to destroy worlds, humans could use it to create them. The same technology that powered the ultimate weapon could become the foundation for stellar engineering on a massive scale. "If we can capture that ship," Johnson explained to the Earth Defense Council, "we can turn their greatest weapon into our greatest tool. We can use their technology to build new worlds, to restore the planets they have destroyed, and to give the conquered species a chance to rebuild their civilizations." General Kate Murphy listened to the presentation with growing excitement. "How long would it take?" "If we can get a team aboard the Planet Killer, we could have the basic modifications completed within weeks." The Coalition designed their systems to be efficient and reliable. Those same qualities make them easy to reprogram for different purposes. Murphy nodded. Then we need to capture that ship. Admiral Zenth was facing the collapse of everything he had believed about warfare and civilization. His expedition to Earth had been intended as a simple integration operation. Instead, it had become the Coalition's first major military defeat in over 1,000 years. The humans had not just survived the Coalition's attacks. They had adapted to them, learned from them, and turned them into advantages. Every weapon the Coalition deployed was eventually captured and improved. Every tactic they used was analyzed and countered. Every technological advantage they possessed was neutralized and reversed, but the most disturbing reports came from the Coalition's border territories. Dozens of conquered species had heard about the human resistance and were beginning to ask dangerous questions. Why did the Coalition need such powerful weapons if they truly brought peace? Why were all conquered species forced to abandon their cultures if diversity was truly valued? Why was resistance always met with such overwhelming force if the Coalition's rule was truly beneficial? For 3,000 years, the Coalition had maintained order through the simple principle that resistance was impossible. But the humans had proven that principle wrong, and their example was spreading throughout the galaxy like a virus. Zenth received his final orders from the Coalition High Command. He was to deploy the planet killer against Earth immediately. Captain Ben Morrison watched the Coalition planet killer approach Earth and felt something he had never experienced before. It was not fear, though any reasonable person would have been terrified. It was not despair, though the massive weapon could crack planets like eggs. What Morrison felt was anger. The planet killer was the size of a small moon, its dark hull bristling with weapons that could boil away oceans and shatter continents. It had ended 17 civilizations in the Coalition's long history, each one a final demonstration of power that broke the will of any species. Foolish enough to resist, Admiral Zenth had deployed his ultimate weapon expecting the usual result. When faced with certain extinction, every other species in the galaxy had surrendered to preserve some remnant of their people. It was the logical choice, the reasonable choice, the only choice that made sense, but humans had never been good at making logical choices. Morrison commanded the combined Earth Defense Fleet, every ship that humanity could put into space. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing a weapon that could destroy their entire world with a single shot. By every measure of military science, they should have surrendered. Instead, Morrison gave the order that would define humanity's place. In the galaxy, all ships attack formation. We are going to capture that thing. Engineer Betty Clark had spent 3 weeks studying the planet killer's design using data stolen from Coalition databases. The weapon was a marvel of engineering, using controlled stellar collapse to generate unimaginable amounts of energy. But Clark had found something the Coalition engineers had never considered. The same systems that made the planet killer so destructive also made it vulnerable to the kind of desperate tactics that humans specialized in. "Captain," Clark reported, from her position aboard Morrison's flagship, the Washington, the planet killer's power systems are incredibly complex but also incredibly centralized. If we can get teams aboard and reach the core systems, we might be able to turn their own weapon against them. Morrison studied the tactical display showing the massive enemy vessel. How many ships would we lose getting boarding parties through their defenses? All of them, Clark replied honestly. But that was always going to happen anyway. At least this way, we go down fighting. The human fleet spread out in a formation that made no sense according to traditional military doctrine. Instead of trying to destroy the planet killer, they were positioning themselves to be destroyed by it. But each ship that died would carry boarding parties. Closer to their target, Morrison's plan was simple and insane in equal measure. The human fleet would sacrifice itself to get small teams aboard the Coalition weapon. Those teams would then attempt to capture the most powerful weapon in the galaxy from the inside. It was the kind of plan that only made sense to a species that had learned to turn certain death into unlikely victory. The battle began with the Planet Killer's main weapons firing at the approaching human fleet. Ships vanished in bursts of stellar fire, vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. But for every ship that died, two more took its place. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan had survived the first battle with the Coalition and volunteered to lead one of the boarding teams. His ship, the New Jersey, was already damaged and leaking atmosphere when it reached the Planet Killer's hull. "Remember," Sullivan told his team as they prepared to cut through the alien hull, "we are not trying to destroy this thing. We are trying to steal it." The boarding action was unlike anything in the history of warfare. Human soldiers fought there, way through corridors designed for beings twice their size, using captured Coalition weapons and improvised explosives to clear their path. The ship's defenders were elite Korthek warriors, but they had never faced an enemy that treated their most secure facility like a building to be conquered. Meanwhile, Dr. Sam Johnson was leading another boarding team toward the Planet Killer's Central Computer Core. His job was to plant the virus that Dr. Williams had designed, a piece of hybrid code that would give humans control over the weapons systems. The Coalition had never imagined that anyone would try to board the Planet Killer. Their security was designed to prevent sabotage, not capture. They had sensors to detect explosives and weapons, but they were not prepared for humans who turned everyday objects into tools of war. Johnson's team used maintenance shafts and ventilation systems to reach the computer core, moving through spaces too small for the Coalition's tall defenders. When they encountered security systems, they used the Coalition's own technology against them, turning defensive measures into entry points. "Johnson to Morrison," he radioed when his team reached the core. "We are in position." Beginning the upload. Now, the virus spread through the Planet Killer systems like a digital plague. Coalition engineers had designed their computers to be secure and efficient, following protocols that had been perfected over thousands of years. But those same protocols made them vulnerable to an attack they had never imagined. Within minutes, Dr. Williams' hybrid code had taken control of the weapon's navigation, communications, and targeting systems. The Planet Killer, designed to destroy worlds, found itself under the control of the world it had come to destroy. Admiral Zenth watched in horror as his ultimate weapon turned its guns on his own fleet. The Planet Killer's massive weapons, powered by the controlled death of stars, began systematically destroying every Coalition ship in the system. "How is this possible?" Zenth demanded. His science officer, Kess, looked up from her displays with an expression of pure terror. "Sir, the humans have taken control of the Planet Killer. They are using it against us. That cannot be done. The security systems are impregnable." "Sir," Kess said quietly, "I do not think these humans understand what cannot be done." "Captain." Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the most powerful weapon in the galaxy systematically destroy the fleet that had brought it. But he was not celebrating yet. The real work was just beginning. Engineer Clark and her team were already deep inside the Planet Killer, working to modify its systems for purposes the Coalition had never imagined. The weapon's stellar manipulation technology, designed to crack planets, could be used to create them. The power systems that boiled away oceans could be used to restore them. "Morrison to all human forces," he broadcast to the scattered boarding teams. "Begin Phase 2. We are going to turn this weapon into a tool of creation." Working around the clock, human engineers began the most ambitious project in their species' history. They stripped out the Planet Killer's destructive systems and replaced them with new technology designed to build rather than destroy. The weapon's massive manufacturing capabilities, originally used to create ammunition and spare parts, were reprogrammed to construct habitats and space stations. Within days, the Planet Killer had become something entirely new. Instead of a weapon of mass destruction, it was now a mobile construction platform capable of terraforming dead worlds and building new civilizations from scratch. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, still serving as humanity's primary diplomat, sent a message to every conquered species in Coalition space. The transmission was broadcast on frequencies the Coalition used for official communications, ensuring that it would reach every world in their empire. "People of the galaxy," she said, My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I represent the free world of Earth. We have captured the Coalition's planet killer and turned it into a tool of liberation. The Coalition told you that resistance was impossible, that their rule was permanent, that you had no choice but to accept their dominion. The image shifted to show the converted weapon, its hull now bristling with construction equipment instead of guns. They were wrong. Resistance is possible. Freedom is achievable. And you do have a choice. Across the galaxy, conquered species. Watch the impossible broadcast with growing amazement. The humans had not just defeated the Coalition's most powerful weapon. They had captured it and turned it into a symbol of hope. On the Drenali homeworld, workers stopped their machines and looked up at the sky. On the Mechari colonies, engineers began drawing plans for the floating cities they had been forced to abandon. On dozens of worlds, people who had forgotten what freedom looked like began to remember. Admiral Zenth sent his final report to the Coalition High Command. It was brief and to the point. Mission failed. Planet killer captured. Human resistance successful. Recommend immediate withdrawal from all human-controlled systems, but it was too late for withdrawal. The human example had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had been conquered centuries ago were beginning to ask dangerous questions. Worlds that had submitted without resistance were starting to resist. The Coalition's 3,000-year reign of unopposed expansion was coming to an end. The war for Earth was over, but the revolution had just begun. Humanity had shown the galaxy that even the mightiest empire could fall when faced with creatures that refused to accept defeat. They had proved that Deathworlders were more than just survivors. They were liberators. As human ships began appearing in systems across Coalition space, carrying the tools and knowledge needed to rebuild destroyed civilizations, the galaxy learned a lesson that would echo through history. There was a reason Deathworlds produced survivors and survivors did not just endure.